Welcome to Straight Shot Politics. Each episode will bring you in-depth discussion with experts, community leaders, and analysts who will share their insights, experiences, and predictions. From local elections to global diplomacy, we'll provide you with the tools and perspectives you'll need to navigate today's real-world landscape.
Welcome to Straight Shot Politics. This is Lisa Chafee. In studio with me right now is Jim Leeser. And on the phone with us, we have Representative from Ohio's 12th District, Brian Stewart, who is a lifelong resident of Southern Ohio, a small business owner, and an Iraq War veteran. He is currently serving, as I said, as State Representative for Ohio's 12th District in the Ohio General Assembly. Brian, thank you for joining us. How are you today?
Great to be here, and great to be on with you, Lisa and Jim. Appreciate what you do.
Great to have you, Brian.
So, Brian, you have been extremely busy. From what I hear, your office is probably the busiest at the State House with working on legislation. Some have passed, some have not, some are still hanging out there. So tell us a little bit, the last year or so, what you've been working on, what you define as your most successful moment.
Well, we've gotten 13 pieces of legislation passed through the House during my time there. That's an awful lot compared to a lot of other members. We have worked on everything from broadband internet to judicial races to the death penalty to trying to protect our Constitution. And I have been working this past year on bringing some transparency to our court system, making sure that public records are made available online, making sure that businesses and individuals that have business in our courts can file things and do things in the most cost-effective manner possible. But what I worked the most on this past year was the Ohio Constitution Protection Amendment, which I know we talked about on a previous episode. This was the idea of making Ohio's Constitution a bit more like our federal Constitution, in the sense that we don't let corporations buy policy in the Ohio Constitution. Unfortunately, that did not pass in this past August, but I put 4,000 miles on my car traveling the state trying to get that done and taking on a tough fight. And that's what I'm always going to do in this job, take on the tough fights. I co-sponsored the SAFE Act which we successfully passed and successfully overrode the governor's veto to say that we are not going to allow biological males to compete against women in sports, and we are not going to allow transgender surgeries on minor children. And so I've been basically at the forefront of every major conservative fight that we've had in the legislature for the last 3 years. And that's what I want to do in another term as well.
You've been very refreshing. As long as I've known you, you've always been on the forefront of the fight.
Yes, we appreciate that. So
thank you.
It's been tough. Things are kind of crazy at the State House with what happened with the Blue 22. Of course, more stuff has happened since then with the current speaker, Jason Stevens. It's not been fun, I don't think, for any of your like-minded state representatives. So what is your motivation to keep going there every day and fighting for these things?
Keeping up the good fight.
Yes.
Well, it's a great point, and I'll say this. We do have some strife in the Ohio House, and I obviously have been working hard to make sure that we do things differently and that we do what voters elected us to do. And there is some nonsense going on that you got to work through every day. But public service is a blessing. It's an honor to be here and an honor for the voters to send me here. I made it home from Iraq when friends did not. And so you won't see me belly aching too much about, putting on a suit and going to the Ohio State House and doing the people's business. But we need to do things better. And, I was elected by, the majority of the Republican caucus to be, the assistant whip for our caucus heading into this term. I was going to be the only member of leadership from my class. And then we had, 22 Republicans that joined with 32 Democrats to let the Democrats pick our speaker. And, I'm not somebody who takes those sorts of things lying down. What's right is right. what's wrong is wrong, and I'm gonna tell it like it is, whether it ruffles anybody's feathers or not. So, part of what we're trying to do is, we are still working and getting bills passed where we can, where we can come together on good conservative policy. We do, but people should know there are a lot of good conservative bills that are stalled, being actively killed, because the Democrats don't want to see them pass, and we have this weird kind of power sharing arrangement that I think needs to end.
That I would have to agree with. It's one thing to work together to reach across the aisle, but when it's just a matter of they're shutting down anything that the conservatives are trying to do. For example, HB 51, the Preservation Act, the Second Amendment Preservation Act to add additional protections to the right to bear arms. A couple of weeks ago in the last session you guys had, Representative Beth Lear tried to pull that out of committee. Tell us a little bit what happened that day and what's coming down the pike for this bill.
Well, you got House Bill 51, which is the Second Amendment Preservation Act. You also have Senate Bill 83, which is some really needed reforms to higher education. It would essentially, kind of rein in this DEI insanity that we have at a lot of our, public Ohio institutions. That bill's been, passed out of the Senate for, almost a year, and, certainly has the support in the Republican caucus in the House to pass. The speaker won't let it come to the floor. We have a similar situation with House Bill 51. And so what we've tried to do is, under the rules, we're allowed to make resolutions to ask for a vote to take a bill directly to the floor. We're allowed to propose floor amendments to try to, I had a floor amendment that would have amended, this higher ed reform into a great big spending bill we were being asked to vote on to essentially give, hundreds of millions of dollars to higher ed. Why should we be giving hundreds of millions of dollars to higher ed if we can't even get a vote on some much needed reforms to higher ed? And so what you've seen is, we have a speaker who, will not recognize members to speak on the floor. If you want to criticize a bill, you're not allowed. If you want to propose amendments, you're not allowed. If you want to try to, force some of these, conservative bills that have support enough to pass onto the floor, you're not allowed. And so that's been trying. And what you've seen some of these sessions is we're trying to, bring attention to this and, force a path for these bills that have the support to pass to actually get a vote doing their job. Unfortunately, those rules pass. And so under the rules, he doesn't have to recognize people to speak if he doesn't want to. I think that's wrong, but that is in the rules. And so, yeah, I mean, we're kind of to a point where you have, 32 Democrats and 22 Republicans, kind of propping up the leader that they want. And, until that would change, we are where we are.
Okay, so is there any particular legislation that you are working on right now that you can share with us?
Yes, sure. So, I mean, I have a bill that would, provide some reform to, how we do veteran services in our state. It would, we have, even after 20 years of war, we still have only 12% of the Veteran Service Commission slots in Ohio are filled by a post 9/11 veteran. I think that's a mistake. I think we need to do some things to make sure that we have more of our, post 9/11 generation veterans on these veteran service commissions, deciding how we're going to, spend these funds to help veterans. We also made some. I joined with Attorney General Yost and former Montgomery County Sheriff Phil Plummer, a fellow representative of mine, and we introduced legislation that would help restart Ohio's carrying out of capital punishment in the state. Now, look, I know everybody doesn't agree with the death penalty, and there are bills that would let people express their opinion with whether we should have that as an option or not. Personally, I believe the capital punishment should be available for the very worst offenders accused, convicted by unanimous juries of the very worst crimes. And other than that, Lisa, as Republicans, what do we always say? We need to enforce the law as written. We don't get to just sort of come in after the fact and ignore it or decline to enforce it. And that's essentially what we've had for the last 5 years. We have, people who have murdered, multiple people, DNA evidence to prove it, confessions, confessed crimes, and we still have duly enacted sentence from Ohio juries that are not being carried out. And so we have introduced legislation that would provide an alternative method to carry those sentences out. And I look forward to working on that because I think it's an important debate for us to have in the state of Ohio.
Yes, definitely. I mean, the death penalty is a very it's an emotional topic, for lack of a better word, to talk about. But I like how you talked about, basically we can't pick and choose what laws to enforce and what not to. And I think here in Franklin County, especially, we're seeing a huge problem where judges are just letting repeat offenders go. I don't know if it's just that they feel sorry for them. They just, what can we do when we have judges and prosecutors who are picking and choosing which laws to enforce?
It's a great point. In Franklin County, for example, there is a policy from the local prosecutor that you can be caught stealing packages off a porch and you won't be arrested or charged. You won't be arrested. I think that sort of begets other kinds of crimes when you allow that to happen. As for judges and prosecutors, and we do give a lot of discretion to local judges and prosecutors to make those decisions, and I think it's important that that voters pay attention to who they're electing to these positions, because they are inherently given a lot of leeway in terms of how our justice system works.
Yeah, that's really frustrating as a voter when there's not an R or a D by a judge's name so that you can start your research there. I mean, you need to research more than just what their party is. But it's impossible to find any information on judges' rulings so you can decide, yes, they're making good decisions, or no, they're not. Is there anything? I know a law was passed that allowed, I believe, the Supreme Court justices and the appellate court judges to have an R or D by their name. But what about at the local level?
There's a lot of debate on that, and I actually introduced the bill that we passed to add party affiliation to the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals races, and thank goodness we did. What you saw was when voters actually know who they're voting for, the undervote, the share of people who just left a certain race blank. In 2020, that undervote was 25% for the Ohio Supreme Court. That's 1 in 4 Trump voters who left the ballot blank because they didn't know who they were voting on. By the time my bill kicked in 2 years later, that undervote dropped to 2%. And so, yes, there's quite a bit of discussion at the State House about, whether it would make sense to extend that party affiliation to the local races. Candidly, there is you get some interesting opinions back and forth, and folks lining up on that because it's probably pretty difficult to win as a Republican in Franklin County, as just one example. But that's an ongoing discussion, and have enjoyed being part of that debate. But it has been a little bit more of a lift to add that for local races as compared to appellate races.
So the Democrats have introduced recently four or five bills between the House and the Senate, all related to the Second Amendment. I honestly believe that they're trying to recreate last November by getting an issue on the ballot that they think is going to drive more Democrats, more independents to the polls in the favor of the Democrats. Last year it was abortion. I think Second Amendment is going to be that issue this year. So some of these bills, they want to mandate that you have to purchase a particular type of safety locks for your guns. They want tax credits for getting those locks. Are you familiar with any of this recent stuff that the Democrats are introducing?
Well, I saw that they made a big show that they were going to introduce a bunch of gun control bills. They introduce these every term. And frankly, the reason they introduce them and make a big show of introducing them is because they know they're not going to go anywhere. There is no possible way that any gun control bill introduced by Democrats or introduced by Republicans, although you don't really see Republicans introducing much of those, you're not going to see those pass. I'm endorsed. I'm the only candidate in my primary we have coming up endorsed by the NRA, the only candidate endorsed by Buckeye Firearms. I've got an A rating from both. I've got an A rating from Ohio gun owners. I've voted for constitutional carry that we got passed in my first term in the House, and very, very proud of that. The media is very happy to take these sorts of kamikaze bills that Democrats introduce on gun control and give them a lot of attention and glowing media coverage, but I can pretty confidently say those are not going anywhere.
Well, thank you for voting on all of those and supporting the Second Amendment. It's near and dear to my heart, and I know I'm not the only one out here that it is near and dear to. But we've been talking a lot of bills that have been in the past, that you've worked on in the past, and all the bills that you're working on now. As you look into your next term, what are some of the things that you would like to accomplish as our state rep?
We need to continue to make Ohio a competitive state on a whole host of levels. One of them is I want to see us continue to move towards, finally eliminating our income tax. You have other states that we compete with that have done it long ago. It's possible for us to do that in Ohio. I think that school choice has certainly become a bigger issue for a lot of Republicans, and since COVID and for many years we had one of the biggest expansions of school choice in the state that we've ever had in the budget that we passed in the middle of last year. I think that's going to continue. Unfortunately, I think there's some bills that I've been working on and talked about on the show that are probably just due to the dysfunction that we've had, may not make it across the finish line entirely in this term. And so I expect that if my bill on the death penalty does not pass this term, we're going to reintroduce that. And I think that we need to continue to work on generating our energy security in this state. I had a bill to expand oil and gas drilling in the state of Ohio, because I don't think people realize how close we are in some respects to not having enough juice to keep the lights on. And we don't want to become California, and that is going to require us to be proactive and take a good hard look at some of our policies in that area.
Yeah, our electrical grid is being stretched to the max, but I'd like to follow up with, I applaud you and I thank you for the state tax reform, because I know as a trustee of a local township that will help us with our joint economic development, or also known as the JED. Going to business owners, and it's hard to ask a business owner. They're fine to sign up for a JED to help local government when it's coming out of their employees' taxes. But when you're starting to tax their net profit, they get a little funky on that. And I applaud you for that. That would help local governments drastically if we could, and not only local governments, but it would also help moms and dads put more food on the table. It would give them more money.
Right. And we also need to look at our property tax structure. I mean, I think that's becoming a big focus and something I want to work on in another term. I mean, all of my counties have seen really substantial property tax increases. Part of that is just because it's a 3-year reappraisal period. And, we've for a long time in this state, our policy has been property taxes are, based on the value of the property, and property values have gone up. But, we have, for example, I co-sponsored legislation to index the homestead exemption to inflation. So for folks who are, seniors and those on a fixed income, as inflation goes up, we need that homestead relief to keep pace. And so we got that done in the last budget. I also voted for legislation to reform the way we do property tax reevaluations, which hopefully would mean that those increases that come are less steep. You don't have this sort of like year over year, 40% increase sticker shock. And we're also looking at, the way some of these levies get passed in the first place. We passed legislation to say that, when you put a levy on the ballot, you need to describe it in a way that people actually understand, right? You need to describe it in terms of, actual dollars, not, so many odd mills for so many odd. A lot of people don't understand what a mill is. And so trying to provide some transparency at the ballot so that, I do always point this out, a lot of what goes into your property tax bill is levies that, voters have voted on themselves. And so if you pass 7 levies, your property tax bill is going to be higher. And we need to make sure that voters know what they're voting on when they go to the ballot box.
Yes, I agree 100%. That was one of our hardest problems with our local township, of educating individuals to go out and vote, but also what the millage means.
Yep.
Correct.
So we're almost out of time, Brian. So I want to give you this last minute or so. I want you to pretend that you've never met me. Sell me on why I should vote for you on March 19th.
Well, I've done what I promised I would do when I got elected to my first 2 terms. I'm consistently ranked as one of the most conservative members of the Ohio House of Representatives by CPAC, the American Conservative Union, but I'm also somebody who gets things done. 13 bills passed out of the House. I don't just talk about draining the swamp, I do it. When I got to the Ohio House, I introduced the resolution to now convicted former Speaker of the House, Larry Householder, as a member. I made sure that he didn't get a taxpayer-funded salary while he was on trial for a $60 million bribery scandal. I'm an Iraq War veteran, and that really informs my love of this country, my love of this state, and frankly, the thick skin that I have to go in and take on the tough fights that a lot of other Republicans don't want to take on. In some respects, judge me by my enemies. Lisa has seen my social media accounts amongst the radical left. They don't like me very much. And, if you want to ruin a Democrat's day in 2024, tell them you're sending Brian Stewart back to the State House.
Amen.
Amen to that. Yes, your social media it is fun to read. That's for sure. Brian, thank you so much. Again, March 19th is the primary. State Representative Brian Stewart is asking for re-election as District 12, and we encourage you to pull the lever for him. And we thank you for your time and your service, Brian. It's been a great pleasure getting to know you, and hopefully we'll have you back soon.
I would love to be back on. Lisa, Jim, you do a fantastic job.
We're
Appreciate you getting
trying
in the fight
here.
with us.
Thank you, Brian. This has been Straight Shot Politics.